It wasn't that Madeleine didn't like her stepfather. She just didn't accept him. Well, he's not her father, right? Madeleine had never had a father, and Robert wasn't her father either. But for her mother's sake, she tried to avoid showing her displeasure in any way from the first days she met him. She wasn't a little girl. She was already 10. She understood that her mother wanted a family. She wanted to be cherished, to be loved. Robert wasn't bad, but he was very silent. But he was just a stranger. It's like he didn't even notice that Madeleine lived there too. But he didn't drink any alcohol, unlike Lily's father. Lily was not only her best friend, but also her cousin. Robert ignored the fact that the woman he loved was raising a daughter. He simply accepted her existence as a fact and began to make plans for the future, hoping that his new wife Grace will bear him his own son, or even two. They married quickly and quietly, sold 2 small apartments, and bought a large one where Madeleine had her own room. And her stepfather and Madeleine established a neutral, tolerant relationship with each other. After lunch, after school, Madeleine went to her room and tried to have less contact with her mother's husband. He never tried to become friends, either. When Grace felt nausea in the morning and began to feel dizzy, all of them were happy. She must be pregnant. Madeleine dreamed of a baby brother, and Robert dreamed of a son. But the worst thing happened. It was not a new life, but a tumor forming in the young woman's brain. Madeleine became an orphan at the age of 12, and she had only one way to go, to an orphanage. She had not yet had time to think about her future, as she was completely crushed by the grief. But suddenly she overheard the conversation between the mother of her friend Lily, Grace's cousin, and Robert. It was as if she was making excuses to Robert. "I'd adopt her. I understand that Grace was my cousin, and we're not strangers. But I can't even cope with my own life. At least once a week, Lily and I have to escape from home when my husband gets drunk. I just can't. We don't have any other relatives." Madeleine didn't want to eavesdrop, but it happened. And from that conversation, she understood that the social workers had come, that they were going to take her to an orphanage, and that the only reason she was still in that big, spacious apartment was that her stepfather had begged the social workers to let Madeleine stay at home for a few more days in hopes of finding Grace's relatives. "Madeleine, we need to talk." Her stepfather tried to start a conversation, but was silent, figuring out what to say. "No need to explain it to me. I already know I have to go to the orphanage." "No, that's not what I was going to talk about. If you don't mind, I want to apply for guardianship. After all, your mother and I were officially married. They say we can try, but only if you want to. I know I'm not a good father, but I can't let you go to an orphanage. I can't. Shall we try? For Grace's sake, let's try. She's probably watching us from heaven right now, and she's worried." Madeleine had no idea that a grown man can cry. Especially Robert. He didn't even cry at the funeral. He just stood there with a stone face. Not a single tear shed. But now he gave vent to his emotions. Madeleine came over, put her arms around him, and comforted him like a child. Everything worked out for them. It wasn't easy, but Robert took custody of the girl, and life moved on. It's hard to say who was more supportive, Robert or Madeleine. But time heals. They settled the household, learned to cook, to talk to each other. Though Robert was too silent, Madeleine got used to it a long time ago. Besides gratitude, she began to feel respect for her stepfather. He was a fair man. He stood up for her at school more than once and tried to cheer her up with the little things. He would buy her ice cream after work, or buy her and her friend Lily 2 tickets to a movie premiere. Aunt Margaret visited them from time to help with household chores. give them some advice, and sort out the bills. Lily often came to visit Madeleine and stayed the night. The pain gradually faded. Life was returning to normal. Robert fulfilled his father's duties, went to school, left part of his salary at home for general use, and never asked for reports of money spent. Madeleine tried not to let him down or upset him, but she never called him Daddy, either in person or behind his back, understanding that she was a stranger to him. When she turned 14, Robert decided to have a serious conversation with her again. This time, he asked her opinion about his marriage. He got into a relationship with a coworker, and it turned out they were expecting a baby. I would go to live with her, but you can't stay alone yet, and moving in together to her place is not an option either. It would be a bit cramped. She only has a room in the company apartment. But what if she moves in here? Do you think we'll get along? Everything seemed to be working out fine. Her stepfather's new wife, Bethany, walked around the home with an important look. It was her first pregnancy. Robert cheered up, and Madeleine tried to smooth out any conflicts that occurred. For some reason, she never had a difficult teenage phase. She must have grown up immediately when her mother passed away. Bethany, on the other hand, was acting strangely. Madeleine thought it was all her pregnancy and didn't tell Robert how the smile slid off his wife's face when Robert left. Bethany was showing Madeleine that she was the boss now and Madeleine was nothing. And now this stranger's child, by misunderstanding, by Robert's stupidity, interferes with their lives. Realizing that Madeleine was not going to tell Robert anything, Bethany began to openly insult Madeleine. She was annoyed by someone else's daughter, someone else's child. Once again, the old tactic helped. Keep out of sight. Robert was unaware of what was going on for a long time. But when his and Bethany's son Eric was born, Robert began to suspect that it wasn't easy for Madeleine to live with them. Bethany had already begun to hint to Robert that a stranger's child was getting in their way a lot. So what? Even if part of this apartment belongs to her, we can pay off her share when she becomes an adult and let her live her own life, away from us. Right now, the government should be taking care of her, not you and me. She's a total stranger to us, she told him. Robert had absolutely no ability to argue. He really had been taciturn since he was young, and arguing with Bethany was simply impossible. But he pulled himself together and said sternly, "Stop it. I don't ever want to hear that kind of nonsense again." After that, he asked Madeleine to visit her mother at the cemetery. They cleaned it up, painted the fence, and replanted the flowers. They sat in silence, and it was as if they had become close again, as in the first 6 months that had been filled with grief and pain. "Don't worry, Madeleine. Everything will get better. Please be patient. Soon Eric will go to kindergarten, Bethany will go back to work, and she won't have time for foolishness and scandal." But Bethany began to act differently. She took all financial matters into her own hands. Madeleine no longer had access to general money. She had to ask Bethany for money for even the bare necessities, even personal hygiene products. Madeleine never complained to Robert. She didn't want to be the cause of their quarrels. She was so glad that her stepfather was cheerful, that he was happy again. She could see how much he loved his son. One day, Robert happened to know that Madeleine didn't go to lunch at school. She was already in 9th grade, often stayed for extra classes, and went to basketball in the evening. It turned out she was always hungry until the evening. She never had any pocket money for a meal either. They used to have a cash box for general use, but now all the money was only in Bethany's card. Robert was called to the school and Madeleine's class teacher told him off. "Robert, please talk to Madeleine. I understand that it's fashionable to be skinny now, but she's too skinny. Like she's sick. Like she's sick. Soon she'll be fainting from hunger, and who should be responsible for that? School again? We're sick and tired of their diets." When Robert finally realized that he had completely forgotten about pocket money for the girl, relying on his wife, He berated himself and scolded Madeleine for keeping quiet. "Daughter, forgive me. I'm a slowpoke. But why didn't you tell me right away? Remember, you have your own bank account. That's where I send all the custody benefits and the payments that the state provides for you, all in your personal account. Let's not spend that money yet. You've got college and a wedding ahead of you. I'll just give you your own bank card so you can use it for your own expenses. Okay?" Madeleine barely listened to him. She didn't hear anything about the money or the card. All she could hear in her head was the word, "Daughter." Could it be that she really wasn't a stranger to him? That he was really worried about her like she was really his daughter? He was worried not about Bethany, not about Eric, but about her. Bethany was very angry when she realized why there was less money on her card. She began demanding that Madeleine's custody benefits go into the general budget so she could spend them, and she loudly lamented that she was running out of money fast. She told Sally that she was saving as much as she could, but that she still couldn't save enough for a vacation. And how could they, if they had to feed that girl, buy her some clothes, and now Robert is giving her money? A couple more years flew by in such a disagreement. Bethany tried to hurt Madeleine, but Robert always stood up for her. Madeleine suffered, knowing that she was the cause of the quarrels in the family. One thing that warmed their hearts was that she and her friend Lily dreamed of graduating from high school, finding a job and renting a room together. Lily's father was constantly drunk, going on week-long binges, selling things from the house to buy alcohol. It was hard to say whose life was worse, Lily's with her biological father, or Madeleine's with her stepfather. But the dream was not destined to come true. Lily had married right after graduation, almost to the first man she met. She couldn't live with her parents anymore. Madeleine's plans had changed too. Now she wanted to enroll in a college that would provide a dormitory. Robert did not support the idea, but he understood that it was difficult for Madeleine to live with them. Robert had even considered buying Madeleine an apartment on credit, but Bethany resisted as best she could, insisting that they should just pay Madeleine the money for her share of the apartment and say goodbye to her forever. A solution came unexpectedly. Robert had inherited a nice apartment in the neighboring city. There was also an economics university where Madeleine secretly dreamed to enroll, but thought that she would not be able to pay the tuition, and there were no scholarships for the desired course, and there were no dormitories available. Robert registered his apartment in Madeleine's name and entrusted her with the management of the bank account, where they accumulated enough money to pay for all the years of her studies at once. He drove her himself to the neighboring city to help her move into her new apartment and to help her apply to university. Well, he really wanted to help her, but there was another reason why he wanted to escape from home for a while. Bethany was making a scene like never before. She'd been so mad when she found out that Robert had officially registered his apartment as Madeleine's. Robert was already tired of scolding and hysterics, so a week off from his wife was a good thing. Robert even went to meet the neighbors in the building. There weren't many apartments there. It was a small 3-story house in a cozy apartment complex. He asked to look out for Madeleine and help her. Surprisingly, it was Robert. Robert, who only went to self-service stores so he didn't have to talk to shop assistants. Robert, who was always silent. For his daughter, he was ready to go over himself. "You're lucky to have such a wonderful father, girl," the neighbors said as they met Madeleine in the neighborhood. "Yes, my daddy is the best," Madeleine agreed. There are heartwarming moments at every wedding when it's hard to hold back the tears. At Madeleine's wedding, that moment was the father-daughter dance. Robert made all the guests nervous that day. The bride did not want to go to the marriage registration until her father arrived. But his car broke down on the highway between the cities. It overheated because of the hot weather. He was driving a new car, which was supposed to be a wedding gift. The The car was just out of the dealership and was not yet ready for such a long trip, but he still managed to be in time for the wedding. That taciturn man managed to do everything in his life.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my 2nd year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit anytime, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.